Welcome, friends, and it's time for our midweek message. This week, I want to take a look at Holy Week and why it is so important to us, in particular, Thursday and Friday. Now, of course, Easter, which comes on Sunday, that's the most important day of the year, but today I want to talk about Thursday and Friday because those lead up to Easter and we can't have one without the other. Now, this week we are having multiple services, and I'd like to extend an invitation to you. We have a Holy Thursday and Good Friday services, both at 7 o'clock. And then on Easter, we have 3 services at 8, 9:30, and 11. This week, on Thursday and Friday, we'll be walking from the Last Supper to the crucifixion. And then on Sunday, we'll be examining the resurrection and what that means for us and how we know that that was, in fact, an event that happened. Right now, though, I want to focus on Holy Thursday and Good Friday, namely the Last Supper. The Last Supper is probably one of the most pinnacle moments in Jesus' history because that's where we see 2 stories come together. We see the work of what Jesus is doing, namely working through his ministry, life, death, and resurrection for the redemption of us and to be freed from sin and death. And we see that tied together with the Exodus story, which happened 12 to 1400 years before the time of Christ, where God freed the Hebrew people from bondage of slavery. This Passover dinner was interesting because it was actually a celebration of what happened in the Exodus story. And it was a meal where every single item on the menu was significant in telling the story. A couple that I'd like to bring to mind. When you look back at the Exodus story, one of the things God had the Hebrew people do was to take the blood of a lamb and put it above their doorpost. And as the angel of death flew over, it would save the Hebrew people. And that wound up becoming the final act which allowed the Hebrew people to be freed. Zoom forward to the Passover, to the life of Christ. Jesus is sitting around the table with his disciples. Now, during this dinner, there would have been multiple food items, but there would have been 4 cups of wine they would have had to drink. And yes, that would have been real wine. The 4th cup, Jesus picks up. Now, this was called the cup of deliverance. Jesus picks it up and said, "This is my blood, blood of a new covenant poured out for you and for many for the forgiveness of sins." The blood of this lamb would free us not only from slavery, but slavery to sin and death. The 2 stories, if you look at all the details, everything clicks. 1,500 years of what God is doing all of a sudden come together. If we had time, I'd go over each point with you, point by point. And I know the first time I did that, everything clicked. It was like a window just opened. It was like the clouds just opened and everything made sense. That's what we have happening here. And to be proof that this whole plan was coming together as predicted and as was illustrated, Jesus was raised from the dead. Now, it causes us to ask a question as followers of Jesus. Are we willing to accept what this lamb did? The Paschal lamb, the Passover lamb. If you'll remember from just a few days ago, Palm Sunday, that would have been the day where the Passover lamb was carried in by the Levitical priests to be taken to the temple and be prepared for Passover. That would have been the lamb where all the sins were replaced, the sins of the people of Israel. And now Jesus rides in on a donkey and a colt into Jerusalem, right behind the lamb. That's why there was crowds there. They were waiting for the lamb to come in. The Levitical priesthood comes in. Then there would have been a following of a Roman contingent of soldiers as a display of power. Rome had to do that because they occupied Jerusalem at the time. And then here comes Jesus on a colt, the real lamb, the final lamb, the final atonement and final sacrifice. And then Jesus has the Passover meal where the whole story is explained, and then he becomes the true lamb, the final lamb, not just for slavery, not just for bondage, but there's no more barrier between us and God, the final sacrifice. And so we have to ask the question, do we accept that? Are we willing to move from passive believism into followers of Jesus. Because if you truly believe that and the work that was done, it will impel us to be different and to follow Jesus. Are we willing to move from, I selected Jesus from a multiple choice list of different deities that we now have or are exposed to in American culture? Are we willing to move from a multiple choice selection to accepting what Christ did and following him? Are we willing to walk to the resurrection and be willing to be resurrected with Christ anew, not only in this life, but in the life to come? This week, the reason it's so contemplative is because we've got to think about what was done on the cross and why, and then what does that mean for us? That's why it's such a somber week. We're supposed to get rid of all of the things that become distractions and just focus on that, because we too have to make that decision at some point. Moving from easy believism, or what's popular in America, you just say, I believe, and go about your life. But move into what Christ has done for us and become a disciple or a follower of Jesus. That's what this week's about. It's a very important week. I'd invite you, whether you've been to church before, or whether you're a visitor, or whether you're a skeptic, or whether you're a deep, devoted Christian, to journey with us through that. On Thursday, we're going to talk about the crucifixion in detail. And on Friday, we're going to talk about the last words on the cross and what those mean. And then on Sunday, we're going to talk about the resurrection and how we know that that's true. So I invite you this weekend, I invite you all this week to really be thinking about what Jesus did. Matter of fact, let me quote a couple theologians. One, I can't remember his name. That's who I'll start with. There was one theologian, he said that if we really understood what Jesus did for us on the cross, we could not follow him. And a similar quote, maybe that's why I remember both of them, because they are so similar. This one was by Jürgen Moltmann. He said, if you really understood the cost Jesus paid for you to be forgiven, you could not forgive other people. That's what it's all about, folks. So I hope to see you this weekend. I'll be praying for you, and I hope we spend some time really thinking about what Jesus did. And it might be uncomfortable. It might cause us to confront some realities we're not comfortable confronting, but I think that's the point. Usually it's through confronting the uncomfortable things that we grow, and this is the week where we do that. But don't worry. On Sunday, we celebrate. We give thanks. We have celebrations and time with our family and friends, and we have a jubilant service on Sunday. So the uncomfortableness isn't there forever, because eventually we rest in the assurance of what Christ did for us and the proof that it all came together. All right, thank you.